I'm a hypnotherapist. I've been doing hypnosis into past lives for 17 years. This is called past life therapy, past life regression, where you take the person into the other lifetimes to find the answers to problems in this lifetime. And it's a form of therapy that's becoming more and more popular. So this is the type of work I've been doing for 17 years. And along the way, I've found some very interesting stories where people have gone into lifetimes where they've been associated with famous people in history, or been in a time when something important was happening in history. And this is mostly what I've written my books about, have been these exciting stories that I have found through people's past lives. So I consider myself to be the reporter, the researcher, and I call myself the researcher for lost knowledge. I have to put all the information together and do the research into it and present it in the form of books. So I'm not a psychic and I'm not a channeler, I'm simply a reporter. That's what I consider myself. But with the Nostradamus material, that was totally different of an ordinary regression session. So it is part of my work as a hypnotherapist. They say it's the strangest case that's ever happened in the history of hypnosis. You can't call it channeling, you can't call it hypnosis because it is so different. It was actually going back through time and contacting Nostradamus while he was alive, living in the 15th century, 1500s in France. But it happened totally by accident. About 10 years ago in 1986, when I was working with a woman who just wanted to go into a past life to see if she had a past life. There was no problem, she didn't want any therapy. But during the course of the regression, some very strange things began to happen. We didn't set out to contact Nostradamus. I don't think you could have. It was something that was totally unpredicted and simultaneous and spontaneous. But during the course of the session, she went back to a lifetime where she was a student of Nostradamus in France. And that's when everything got very strange, because as this male student, she was talking about Nostradamus, and suddenly she said, "He wants to speak to you." And I was totally, shocked, because anyone who does this kind of therapy knows that does not happen in this kind of therapy. And she said, "He has a message for you." He had been looking for a link to the future, because he could see that the prophecies he had written were not being correctly interpreted, and the time was coming when they were going to come true. When he says he has an assignment for you, he wants you to get the book that has the prophecies in them in French and English, and he wanted me to read them to him, and he would tell me what they meant and explain all of the code that has been lost for 400 years. He would explain every symbol, every anagram, and tell me what part of history. And at that time, I didn't even know what a quatrain was. The quatrain is a 4-line poem, in the case of Nostradamus, a 4-line prophecy, and he wrote almost 1,000 of them, and not even half of them have ever been correctly interpreted. And some of them have been interpreted after the fact, after they've already occurred. So it was quite an assignment. But when the woman woke up and I told her what she had said, she was so frightened she moved to Alaska. So you can't say I started it, you can't say she started it. There was something very peculiar at work here that is still difficult to explain to people. But we had time for one more session before she left. I think she was trying to appease me more than anything, and it was helped with packing boxes and suitcases, and she was having a garage sale, and she said, "I have 1 hour to do the session," and then they were having a going away dinner for her. But during the session, he came through again, and he said, "I still want you to do this work." I said, "I can't, she's moving away." He said, "That doesn't matter. Now that we have made this connection, I will come through anybody you work with." And he gave me the instructions how to locate him and a test to perform so I would know I was actually speaking to him. And this is why it ended up with 3 volumes, because over the course of 3 years, it went through 12 different people. He did what he said. He would come through anybody I worked with. It was like having his telephone number, and I could call him up anytime I wanted, and I'm still able to do it if we want to get some more information. But we successfully translated all of the known prophecies, almost 1,000 of them, and I had the unenviable job of putting them in order, in a chronological order of some kind. It took a computer to do it. But the translations were coming so fast at the height of our work that as fast as I could read them to him, he was giving it back. We were doing 30 translations in an hour. It's absolutely impossible for the human mind to do that. It cannot think that fast. But he was telling me what all the symbols were, the anagrams, and he broke the code. Then I had to use a computer to put it together. So it ended up with 3 books because it took many twists and turns along the way. And none of the people I worked with knew anything about what the other ones had said, but yet they continued the same scenario, the same story he was trying to get across to our time. There was no deviation, no matter what prophecy I read. I found later it wouldn't have mattered if I would have started at the beginning of the book and read straight through, because they are in no set order. They're not in chronological order. I would just open it to anywhere in the book and check off after I'd read it. But at the height of this, they were just coming so fast, 30 in an hour. But there's another part to this that makes it even stranger, is he was most emphatic. He said, "You must understand you are not speaking to the dead. I'm not a spirit floating around out here somewhere." And he wanted me to be very sure that I emphasized that. He said, "You are speaking to me while I am alive, living in France, writing the prophecies." And you know what that brings up, if that's true? It's the metaphysical concept of simultaneous time, that there is no time, that everything is occurring all at once. Very strange and very difficult concept, but this is what he said. I am contacting him while he is alive. That's why I consider it having his telephone number. But I got to know him very well, and he is really a very definite personality, and there was no way we could mistake it when we had contacted him. Okay, because they all described his physical appearance as being the same, but his eyes especially were very penetrating and very strong eyes. But he had a definite temper. He would get very upset with me if I had not done the correct research. He would tell me exactly where to go in the libraries to find the information. And in breaking the code, a lot of it had to do with ancient Greek philosophy, Greek history, and Greek legends, because he said this way he could fool the Inquisition by thinking he was commenting on history, and actually he was foretelling an event. But when I didn't quite understand what he meant, he kept saying, "I'm appalled at your lack of education, because we don't have to learn those things in our time period." But he would tell me where to go in the libraries to find them. And if I did not do the research exactly, he would have this very stern temper. But it was as though you were with a very stern schoolmaster, I think would be the way you would classify it. As though you were a student with someone who had all this knowledge and trying to learn from them. But also, I found out that he was very definitely a male chauvinist. And I said that was okay, because during the time periods he lived in, women were not educated. They were not taught anything. And he didn't have the same relations with women there that we would today. So I could understand that. But it was a very definite personality. The main reason was the Inquisition, because he was living during the time when the church was very powerful, and to do anything like this, he would have been condemned to death. Or he said he would have taken his land away and thrown him into prison. So he had all these visions, and what is he going to do with them? At first he was writing them down in a kind of a diary, but he knew that if he died, they would be found and they would be burnt. So how was he supposed to protect the prophecies, to get them to our time period for which they were intended? The only way was to devise this code. And anagrams were very popular in France during that time period, so he was using something he was familiar with. And he made these anagrams and puzzles. And there were, that's why he was almost 1,000 of them. He said there were actually about 1,500, but some of them have not survived to our time. But he had to do it to confuse the Inquisition. And it worked, because they have come down to our time, even though they've been undecipherable in most cases. The main reason that he said he was making this contact was because he wanted us to help change the futures. He said, a lot of people don't like Nostradamus because they say he's doom and gloom, very horrible predictions. He said, if I show you the most horrible things man can do to himself, will you do something to stop us? The worst case scenarios of what would happen if nobody did anything at all. He saw time not as one future set in concrete, but as many branches. many probabilities and possibilities off of an event. So he was showing us the worst case scenario off of any of these paths that you continued on. So he believed that mankind could change the future, especially if you knew what that future was. So his job was to tell us, this is what's going to happen if you continue along this path. And he said that man doesn't know the power of his own mind. If you knew what was going to happen and focused on the opposite scenario, the opposite effect, that could be our future. We could create that with our minds. But he also said, if the power of one man's mind is that powerful, imagine the power of group mind. That if you get groups of people focusing on the opposite, on peace and harmony for the world, you could truly create miracles, because the power of the mind at that point would not only be multiplied, it would be squared. The power would be tremendous. And this is what my message has been as I travel all over the world, is tell people they can change the future. They are not puppets. They do not have to go along with what is predicted. We can have a wonderful future if we just know about it, focus on it, use our minds. We're so scattered. Our energy is very scattered. When you focus that energy, it can be tremendous.